You need to get you a Mac. It really does make a difference if you're going to do much of these.
Okay. Now it says that it's recording. Finally.
Yeah. Someone started.
All right. It is Monday, February the 5th, 2024, and I've got a time of 2:03 p.m. So we're going to give everybody just a few more minutes to join up, and then I'll get started. Of course, at some point this evening, I will be able to upload the video to YouTube for everybody that didn't get to watch today or didn't get to participate today. Okay, it's now 2:05 on Monday, February the 5th, 2024, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Of course, this is our EMT class that's centered around the Break Center State Park. Joining me so far is Matt Slimp. But if you happen to miss this lecture, you're always welcome to watch it on YouTube. In fact, I'll do an email with a link in it this evening so everybody can see. Also, for everybody's understanding, I was advised that there were some folks that couldn't get into the meeting last week. They were delayed for some time. If for some reason you ever join one of these meetings late, just send me a text message or send me a message on Facebook Messenger, and I'll flip back over and admit you in. I believe when I switch over and start sharing a screen, for some reason I'm not able to hear or get the notification that somebody wants into the class. This week we're going to be talking about Chapter 7, Principles of Pathophysiology. We're also going to continue on and do Chapter 8, which is Lifespan. Chapter 7, Pathophysiology. So what is pathophysiology? Pathophysiology is simply the study of how disease processes affect the function of the body. It's great that we know what's going on, but it's even better that we know how it's going on. Now, pathophysiology is a huge topic. It gets very in-depth, and that's beyond the scope of EMT practice or EMT knowledge. The idea behind this is you get a little bit of understanding so you can understand how the body systems relate to each other and how illnesses and injuries affect those body systems. You know, it's kind of like Merle Haggard had that song, and the line is rolling downhill like a snowball headed for hell. Well, sometimes when people start decompensating, that's exactly what's going on. They're rolling downhill like a snowball, and you know where that snowball's going. Um, your body wants to be in a state called homeostasis. And all homeostasis is a very stable environment. Now, in order to maintain homeostasis, your body's got to go through a lot of different processes, everything from your nervous system thinking and directing everything, your respiratory system bringing air in and out, your cardiovascular system pumping the nutrients and oxygen around, your digestive system processes the food you eat and introduces those nutrients into the circulatory system. And then you have other systems such as the urinary or renal system, which excretes waste products. So we're just going to skim the top of that and begin to get you thinking about pathophysiology in general. The basic building block of your body is the cell. I know when we talked about anatomy and physiology, we talked about the levels of organization in the human body. Well, the cell is the most basic unit of life, and your body is made up of all kinds of different cells. Those like cells become tissues. Tissues join together and form organs. Groups of organs form organ systems, and multiple organ systems come into play to create an organism. Our body is really quite complicated and intricate. Why do we need to know about this stuff? Well, first of all, we need to understand that if somebody has, for example, a gunshot wound, that not only do you have soft tissue damage, you can have bleeding. And then we learn how bleeding affects the cardiovascular system, and how the cardiovascular system then in turn affects the respiratory system and the nervous system and all those other systems. So that's why we need to hit upon this. All cells are primarily made of water. And I know in class on Thursday, Austin said he had read ahead and he was really excited to hear about water being so important, about it being mentioned so much. Water is the vehicle that everything moves on. Without water, nutrients can't move back and forth. Electrolyte levels are altered, and when electrolyte levels are altered, nervous impulses are altered. So we've got to have water. That's what dissolves everything, and that's what moves those nutrients and gases into the cell. We're going to admit one more here. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, Albert.
Hey, we're just going over principles of pathophysiology, and we're in about the second page now. We've talked about it, why water is important, and now we're going to talk about glucose in the cell. Glucose is simply a fancy term for sugar. Glucose and oxygen combine together to form a substance called ATP, which is, I'm going to try to pronounce it, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is what causes every function in the cell to happen. Glucose is the fuel source, and oxygen is what catalyzes or causes the process to happen. Just like if you've got a car or a lawnmower or anything like that, you can imagine glucose being similar to gasoline. That's the fuel. But if you've ever fooled with a car or a lawnmower, we know that if you don't get the proper amount of oxygen mixed with the gasoline, the proper amount of air mixed with the gasoline, then combustion doesn't occur. Well, your body is very similar. You've got to have fuel and you've got to have oxygen in order to function. Metabolism is the cellular function of creating nutrients into energy. If oxygen is utilized the way it's supposed to be, that's called aerobic metabolism. And that is the normal type of metabolism that happens in the body. Energy is produced in a very efficient manner, and you have minimal waste products. Whereas the opposite, we could have anaerobic metabolism, and that is the cellular process in which glucose is metabolized into energy without oxygen. If you have anaerobic metabolism, which is metabolism without oxygen, you produce a lot of waste products, or the body produces a lot of waste products as it functions, and that's pretty inefficient. Talk about the regulation of homeostasis. The nervous system helps to regulate homeostasis by the production of chemicals called hormones. And those produce your fight or flight response. These are neurotransmitters called epinephrine and norepinephrine basically cause your body to speed up, causes you to breathe faster, causes your heart to beat faster. And that's your fight response. And then we've got a flight response, the parasympathetic. The cardiopulmonary system plays a big part in pathophysiology. Because as we know, again, to review, the cardiac system helps to circulate what's going on. It helps circulate what's in there. Now, if the cardiac system doesn't have enough oxygen or enough nutrients, excuse me, the you're circulating a bunch of blood which isn't carrying the nutrients and oxygen you need. So in turn, the body starts to fail again. Um, and this is just kind of skimming over the surface because all the in-depth stuff is going to happen in the other chapters where we start talking about different types of emergencies and how they relate back to the patient. Has anybody heard the term shock? I'm sure somebody's heard the term shock. And shock is a fancy word. Well, actually, shock is a simple word which describes this fancy word called hypoperfusion. Hypo meaning low, perfusion meaning circulation. So shock is hypoperfusion. Hypoperfusion is the fancy word that basically means body-wide poor circulation. Poor circulation of blood generally causes poor circulation of oxygen and nutrients. And there's different types of shock that we'll get into as we go along. Shock can be caused by many things, from poor cardiac function, poor respiratory function, can be caused by low levels of fluid, which is called hypovolemic shock. Hypovolemic shock is generally caused by dehydration or bleeding out. Shock can also be caused by bee stings and other envenomations, or exposure to medicines and chemicals, and that's called anaphylactic shock. Again, all of those topics will be covered more in depth when we get into the individual chapters that deal with the individual types of emergencies that we are going to be handling. Be sure to complete your My Brady Lab system assignments online in order to get the in-depth knowledge related to pathophysiology. And we want to know pathophysiology. We want to understand the concept, but getting down to the little bitty details, we're going to work on that as we go. Anybody have any questions about pathophysiology? Okay. Move to Chapter 8, Lifespan Development. Lifespan development is another one of those chapters or topics that get thrown in to help us understand what we're doing. And if it doesn't help us understand what we're doing, maybe it will help us understand why we're doing it or how we're doing it. There's a great difference between a newborn baby and a school-age child. And there's also differences between school-age children and adolescents and adults and geriatrics. So let's dive into lifespan development. The first stage of lifespan development that we're going to talk about is infancy, and that's birth through 1 year. That's probably where the body does most of its growth and development. Now, it may not do most of its physical development during this time or physical growth during this time, but you're going to get a lot of development because an infant is basically, a newborn baby is basically helpless. And within that year, as that newborn baby grows up and becomes the 1-year-old, it's going to be a more stable being. It's going to be healthier. It's going to be better able to fend for itself. It's going to be able to eat and function without so much interference or interaction from the parents. So birth to 1 year is infancy. You'll notice in your text, there's some vital signs for an infant listed, and these are important to know. Heart rate. If you have a newborn, the heart rate should be between 100 and 170. But by the time the infant reaches the age of 1 year, the heart rate will have dropped a little bit. So the normal heart rate then would be 90 to 160. So the body is kind of slowing down. The heart rate is slowing down. Respiratory volume is going to increase. Why do you think respiratory volume is going to increase as the child gets older? Respiratory volume is going to increase because the physical size is going to increase. The respiratory rate is going to decrease. Initially, up to about 6 months old, these children are breathing between 30 and 60 times a minute. Between 6 and 12 months, that respiratory rate starts to drop, and you're going to see respiratory rates of 24 to 30. Now, if you have a newborn baby, it's breathing 35, 36 times a minute, we may not be concerned. However, if you have an adult that's breathing that often or at that rate, you're going to be much more concerned. Also, something that's going to happen is the blood pressure is going to start working its way up. So the heart rate will drop, start to decrease, blood pressure will start to increase. Respiratory rate will decrease, while at the same time respiratory volume, the amount of air pulled into the lungs, is going to decrease as time goes on. There's some psychosocial changes that happen during that first year of life. Important things that happen during the first year of life include bonding. This is where the infant develops an attachment to its caregiver, usually to the mother. The infant is going to develop a sense of trust versus mistrust. So are these familiar people safe? Are they going to take care of me? Do I trust them? Or are these people unsafe and do I mistrust them? There's a term called scaffolding. If anybody's been around building maintenance or if you've laid block or brick, you know what scaffolding is. Scaffolding is the ladder-like structure with walk boards that are erected outside of a building while someone's laying brick or block. I know our new Food City in Clintwoods, we drove by every day, the scaffolding would go up, and as with the number of courses or the number of rows of brick and block. Well, scaffolding, when we talk about lifespan development, means to learn by building upon what you already know. Guys, it's kind of what we're doing here in this EMT class as well. We're going to get into the basics, and we're going to use the basics so you can build upon what you know and increase your knowledge. Also, within the first year of life, children start to develop their temperament. Are they easygoing or are they irritable? I know I've had several children, and I've had children that run the range of being happy when they wake up in the morning to absolutely being miserable when they wake up in the morning. And sometimes it just depends on the child. Okay, the second phase of lifespan development that we're going to talk about is the toddler phase. That's the 12 to 36 month age. The toddler phase is when children start to get into stuff and they start to move around more. Excuse me. Some people call the toddler phase the terrible twos, and if you've had children, you can understand the terrible twos. I think a lot of them get frustrated trying to figure out exactly what's going on in the world, and they don't know how to express themselves very well. So the physiologic changes that happen during that toddler phase is the pulmonary system. With the pulmonary system, the airways branch and grow out more. More alveoli are created. The nervous system becomes about 90% of the adult brain weight. So the brain grows during that phase. Fine motor skills develop. Fine motor skills being the ability to move your fingers and body parts with small movements, and that's what allows people to learn how to write or draw or even operate a keyboard. Muscle mass and bone density increase. The immune system starts to decrease because the effects of the mother's immune system are really wearing off during this time. And as the child becomes more susceptible to illness, they become sick and they start to develop immunity on their own. Now, that's improved or increased through regular vaccinations. The vital signs of a toddler: heart rate 80 to 104, respirations 24 to 40 breaths a minute, and the systolic blood pressure. Generally, it's above 90. And then you add the age in years times 2. For example, a 2-year-old should have 90 plus 2 times 2. So more 94. So 3-year-old could have 90 as its base plus 3 times 2 is 6, so 96 as a systolic pressure. And systolic pressure is simply the top number in your blood pressure. We'll learn more about those next week when we get into taking vital signs. The next group or age group that the text talks about is preschool age. Preschool age generally is 3 to 5 years of age. That's when kids go to preschool. These kids, their body continues to grow and they continue to get more adjusted to life and more adjusted to other people as far as psychosocially. They become part of a group. They learn how to interact with others versus a lot of times your toddler age group, those kids kind of just play by themselves. There's a phenomenon called parallel play. I know it's not in the book, but parallel play is when you'll have groups of children who are playing independently but side by side. When they move into preschool age group, that changes. They start to interact better. Now, my favorite age group is the school age, 6 to 12 years. This is where the children continue to grow and become more independent. Between 6 and 12 years old, these children start to learn skills. They learn skills as far as how to make a sandwich. If your children can't make a sandwich by the time they're 12 years old, I'd be very concerned. I've got a 6-year-old, or not a 6-year-old, but an 8-year-old who's been able to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches since he was 6 because he loves peanut butter and jelly. If they can learn to do tasks, to do little occupational chores, they continue to grow and mature. They continue to interact with their peers, and they learn appropriate ways to interact with adults. Now, again, that's my opinion. That's the best age group to have. When we get into adolescence, the 13 to 18-year-olds, things really start to go awry. During this stage, they develop their adult bodies and they want to become more independent. All of a sudden, mom and dad don't know everything that mom and dad think they know. Children develop body image problems sometimes during adolescence. They become very sensitive about how the groups treat them. However, they develop that capacity for being logical. They develop a better capacity for being able to analyze things. And they also develop more abstract thinking. They also develop a personal code of ethics. They start to say, this is right and that's wrong. Now, and in my opinion, I think ethics are based on how the individual feels, not just what everyone else requires. Then we get into early adulthood. Okay, that's Andrew. That's the 19 to 40-year-old range. I'm going to pick on Andrew and say he's probably in the late stages of early adulthood.
Yeah, 35.
35. I was 35 one time. Of course, I also remember Andrew when he was about 17. 16 or 17. Those were the good old days, wasn't they, Andrew?
Yes, they were.
Okay. During early adulthood, you or the patient or the person develops into a true adult. This is the stage where you are perfecting your learning. You develop adult vital signs. And those are the standard vital signs we often talk about, like a heart rate of 60 to 100 beats a minute, respiratory rate of 12 to 20, or systolic blood pressure of less than 120. As time goes on, that blood pressure is going to start changing. You're also going to see the development of some chronic health problems. Middle adulthood, 41 to 60. This thing sometimes includes a time of reflecting about how far you've came in life and how far you wish you came in life. Some of these folks start to have midlife crises in that age. Man, am I really 45 years old and this is all I've accomplished? Man, am I 45 years old and I've got teenage children that don't like me anymore? A wife that doesn't like me anymore? Do I need to find a new wife or go buy a fancy sports car? Again, those are examples of those midlife crisis, middle adulthood stuff. Middle-aged people should really be happy, but I think a lot of times middle-aged people are just working a whole lot, trying to obtain goals they wish they had obtained earlier. Physiologically, there's no real significant changes in vital signs. We might we may start having some vision problems. We may start wearing prescription glasses if we hadn't already started. Weight control becomes an issue. Those chronic diseases really start showing up more and more. Chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, high blood pressure. People in middle adulthood see that their lives are starting to become shorter. Maybe I've got less time to live than what I've already lived. And if you're in our business, you do see that a lot. It makes your mortality, your vulnerability much more evident or much more apparent to you. We can become concerned about our children that start their new lives. And then we're also kind of stuck in the middle and trying to take care of elderly parents. Now, the late adulthood group, that is age 61 and older. This is where you start to become an old person. Your vital signs start to change based on your health and your physical condition. Your cardiovascular system becomes less efficient. The blood volume decreases. You're less tolerant of changes in blood pressure. You're less tolerant of changes in heart rate. Your body is less tolerant and more susceptible to diseases at this point. Maybe you have trouble sleeping. A lot of our patients have traditionally been in this older adult category. And many of them we call old, many of them are what's been referred to by some folks as the old. That's the 75 or 80 years old and up group. And we see those people. We interact with those people quite regularly in our profession. So why was it important that we talk about lifespan development? Because as you know about each age group, you can start to get an idea of how significant different illnesses and injuries could be in those age groups. For example, if a young child is hit by a car crossing the street, the bumper may hit them chest level. Whereas if I get hit by a car crossing the street, the bumper is probably going to hit me at about knee level. A little bit of oxygen deprivation at 44, where I'm 44, is going to be tough enough. If I was 24, it'd be a little easier to tolerate. But if I was 74, that little bit of oxygen deprivation could have a more significant impact on my condition. The other reason we need to talk about lifespan development is to talk about how we interact with different age groups. It's usually pretty easy to interact with the age group that you're in and those that are close to it. I can talk to 30-year-old people, I can talk to 40-year-old people, 50-year-old people just fine, but communicating with teenagers is difficult. And daggone, communicating with toddlers, I'm at a complete loss. So I've got to consider my tone, my actions, how I approach people. Now, we talked about going younger. Well, what about elderly people? We have a lot of patients with dementia, and they can be difficult to communicate with. My father's one of those folks with dementia. It's difficult to communicate with. But let's say the elderly person doesn't have dementia. Your communication may be hampered simply by hearing loss or vision loss, or maybe you're not addressing those people correctly. They feel maybe you're not providing them the respect that they deserve. So you've got to be very careful when you deal with different groups of people. Yeah, that is pathophysiology and lifespan development in a nutshell. The idea is not to stress over all the details in those chapters. The idea behind those chapters is to have a little background information, a little background knowledge that you can apply throughout everything else that we study. And ultimately, everything else that we do professionally as EMTs. Now, I know on this past Thursday, we covered airway management. We also covered ventilation, respirations and ventilation. Well, this coming Thursday, we're going to do something even more fun. What are we going to do? We're going to talk about patient assessment. Items like seeing size up, the primary assessment, excuse me, and vital signs and patient care monitoring equipment. So if you are in possession of a blood pressure cuff, of a stethoscope, and if you'd like to use those during class, feel free to bring them. If you don't have the correct equipment, that's fine. You don't need it for class. Don't feel obligated to go out and purchase any equipment at this point. But if you have your own and you want to use it, that's entirely your right. And if you want to go out and purchase it, that's your right as well. My suggestion is don't spend any significant amounts of money. For the purpose of being an EMT, a $25 stethoscope will probably be just as good as a $125 stethoscope. The $10 stethoscope may be okay too. I'm a little hard of hearing and I've got a little bit higher quality stethoscope because of that. But when it comes to taking a blood pressure and things, I can make do with the cheap stuff. So again, if you have a stethoscope or you have a blood pressure cuff, feel free to bring it, but don't feel obligated to buy anything. Additionally, we're going to be talking about the device called a pulse oximeter. If you've got one of those at home and you feel like bringing it, that's fine. If not, I believe Matt's probably going to be bringing the ambulance. And he's going to have a nice cardiac monitor and probably multi-function vital sign monitor all built into one unit. We'll get to play with that some. I've got a couple of individual finger type pulse oximeters that we can use as well. You know, don't feel the obligation to go buy anything. I'm going to let's see. I'll see if I can share my screen here, guys. What I'm doing is trying to go over the email I sent out the other day. There's some suggested videos. I don't know, can you guys see this? Or are you just still seeing me?
Still seeing you.
Just seeing you.
Okay, let's see. How about now? Are you able to?
There it
Yeah,
is.
we got it.
Okay, I think there's a little bit of a delay in pulling that off. I just wanted to point out at the bottom of the email, those are some links to some neat YouTube videos that you can watch in your own time if you want to. Excuse me. Especially if somebody has no experience taking a blood pressure or checking for blood glucose. Anything like that can be really, really helpful. And that should turn you back over to me. Does anybody have any questions? Good. Okay, guys, I appreciate you guys watching and attending. I don't know, Andrew may be joining us for some of our skills day classes.
Yeah, I plan on being there Thursday.
Oh, okay. We'll be there in the Chafin Lounge or
Okay.
Chafin Lodge, all the way back in the conference center portion. Andrew is working on becoming an education coordinator, and this should be able to help him along, and it'll provide me a little help too in class, which is great. I appreciate that. If there's no questions, I'm going to stop the recording, and then this afternoon, when the Teams meet window has expired, I'll be able to convert this over and post it on YouTube for everybody to see. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.